by the time this friend was like, I don't think you're okay. Like, and I'm like, you know what? You're right. I'm not okay. Like, I'm tired. I'm done trying to hide how I feel. Like, I'm done, like crying in secret. Like, I've been through these things. Like, of course I feel this way, and it's okay for me to feel this way. And I've found, like, in opening up and dealing with those things, like, even if it makes other people uncomfortable, that is what has gotten me to healing, is being honest and being open and vulnerable.
Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast. I am your host, Ray Donovan, and here we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety, and I'm pretty excited about our guest today. She actually reached out to us to share her story. So again, anytime someone is willing to step into their vulnerability and reach out and share their story in the hopes that they might be able to help someone else who needs to hear it, I'm all for that. So we have Amy Hall with us today, and I think we'll have a really great conversation. I've been following her for a little bit. I've heard snippets of her story, and I'm really excited to kind of get into it. I think she has a lot that she'll be able to share, and I know that she comes from a place of transparency. So we'll try to keep that as organic as we possibly can. So without further ado, Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be on the show, and I'm grateful that you had me today. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Amy was telling me before the show that she has literally binge listened to every episode of the Stacking Days podcast. And I don't know if there's anyone besides maybe, myself and a few other folks who have listened to every minute of the show. So, she probably knows the show maybe just as well as I do. So with that, let's start how we start this show always. Amy, take us back to when your relationship with alcohol started. What was kind of the why behind why you found it, and ultimately what role did it play in your life? And we'll just go.
I think I really started like my relationship with alcohol when I was about 18, but I think a few years leading up to that is kind of where my curiosity with drugs and alcohol started. I would say when I was 10 years old, I was sexually assaulted, and nothing was ever really done about it. And I also didn't really know how to talk about it, so I kept that in. And I feel like from then, like, things got a little bit like topsy-turvy for me. Once I got into high school, I did okay for a while. A lot of the friends that I hung out with were into drugs and alcohol, but I hadn't really gotten all the way interested in that yet. So, but I always seem to like connect with people who've gone through that journey. So I felt like that's really interesting knowing where I am now. When I was about 16, that's when I started to get into like pills. I didn't actually know what I was taking. It was just like a friend of mine had these and was like, hey, these would be good to try. So I did that for a little while. And then I didn't really want to anymore. So I stopped doing that. But when I was 18, the first time I drank, I got blackout drunk. And I feel like I had like the best time of my life. Even though I don't really remember most of it. It was at a friend's house. And I didn't drink a lot after that, but I did go out with friends. And when I was 19, I got pregnant. So all of that stopped for a little while. And that's kind of where things started to get more rocky for me. I was living with my grandma at the time, and we had a very tumultuous relationship. She was abusive towards me in many ways, but she was also like the only person in my family who showed up for me. So that was kind of confusing for me. After I had my son, I ended up with postpartum depression, like real bad. And when I tried to reach out to my grandma about it, she didn't really understand depression. And she told me that depression was for weak minded people. And so I had a lot of trouble like reaching out for help after that, because I was kind of confused as like, am I a weak minded person? Like, is this something that I really can just push through? And I think that was when my attraction to alcohol really, really started. It gave me what I felt was like freedom from the life that I had. I could really disconnect, and it felt like a way to like release all of the anxiety and the feelings that I had been feeling. Um, I was working in restaurants at the time, and that's just really the culture. And it was like alcohol takes care of everything. When you're sad, you drink. When you're celebrating, you drink. When you're angry, you drink. Like that was what it was for me. I wasn't drinking every day at the time, but it was like most weekends and like some nights after work um, that I would really start to get into drinking quite a bit. And a lot of the people I hung with drank a lot too, so that didn't seem abnormal to me. And we were in our early 20s, so that was like, you're 21 now, so that's just what we do when we turn 21.
Sure.
Um, Shortly after that, my best friend got into a car accident and he ended up losing his life, and that really affected me quite a bit. I went into a real deep depression, and I think that's when I started to cope with alcohol and started to explore into other drugs at that time as well. I had gotten introduced to Xanax, and I really loved it at the time because it was like a chill pill. Like literally, it was like, okay, I can take this and I can actually feel calm, which is something that I don't think I had ever felt ever in my life if I really think about it. Um, I struggle with a lot of mental health issues. I'm bipolar and I deal with anxiety. But I had no idea at this time that that was my diagnosis because I hadn't gotten there yet. So I was doing the Xanax and I was drinking, and I ended up like going to my doctor to get prescribed it because I really liked it and I felt like it would help me in my treatment. Not understanding that you really shouldn't be drinking if you're on Xanax, and it's a lot of moments that I do not remember. I feel like I had a lot of things under control, but again, like a lot of things I don't remember. I do remember around this time that it got to a point where I was drinking like a bottle of wine every night for a while. Um, I would watch Grey's Anatomy and just drink and be sad, and then I would go out and I would drink with my friends and try to come back and be like a parent. So I feel like I was living like two separate lives is what it felt like. I had my party girl side and my put together parent person side that I was trying to keep together. Um, I think I did pretty well, mostly because like my grandma did let me stay with her for quite some time, and I think that in and of itself saved me from going too deep.
Hmm. That's a lot. I'm just kind of almost have this visual timeline of your early life. And first of all, I'm, s- you know, I'm so sorry that you had to, endure what you did at such a young age of 10 years old. And I'm sure that there's just so much for you to unpack there. So obviously, if it's uncomfortable for you, we don't have to go into it. But from 16 years old, you start, dabbling. 19 years old, it gets ratcheted up once again. You have your son. 21 years old, you lose a friend. It seems like every couple of years you're dealing with these very large milestone moments in life that come with a lot of big emotions and ambiguity that you're trying to get over. And so, all to say, the fact that we're having this conversation right now, just hearing a little bit more about what you've been through, I just want to take my hat off to you for the strength that you've shown to yourself, first and foremost. So wanted
Thank
to
you.
put that out there. Absolutely. Um, so much to talk about. I feel like, right? You've been sober for how long now? You've been in recovery for how long?
Um, 2.5 years now. It'll be 2 years and 7 months on February 1st.
Okay, February 1st, 2.5 years ago. How did you ultimately get to that point where you were able to step into sobriety? It seems like you didn't have a lot of support around you for number one, the recognition of your state at the time, because the party side of you seems as though that it was validated by your peer group, and then it seemed as though that it wasn't bleeding so much into your ability to take care of your child. So how did you get to a point where you said to yourself, okay, the wheels are starting to fall off here. I need to start doing some things differently before things get out of hand and I can't reel it back in?
It took me a while after that point to kind of get there, but so after I lost my friend, I went into like a few years of like really getting acquainted with drugs and alcohol, and I didn't understand addiction the way I do now. So I felt like I was doing okay because I was able to show up and able to do the things that I felt like I was supposed to be doing, even though it did get really difficult after some time. But I think I started to just lie to myself and lie to other people. So as far as like really it not bleeding in, I don't feel like that's the truth, but I I wanted it to be. I wanted to feel like I'm doing great over here so I can do these things. That was kind of my MO. Like if I do all these things perfectly, it shouldn't matter what I do in my free time. Um so this was, I think, want to say like from 2013 to like 2015 is when I was drinking quite a bit and dabbling in lots of different other drugs. Like I kind of wanted to try anything to see how it made me feel because I just wanted to be disconnected
Mm.
from my life and from the disappointments that were, popping up here and there from behaviors from when I was drinking and on other drugs. In 2015, my grandma got sick, and we found out she had cancer. And a few months after she went into the hospital, she ended up dying. And that was really, really hard for me. And this is when I believe that my drug and alcohol use got the worst. Um, I feel like she was really my anchor to a lot of things, even though, we had like a tumultuous relationship. I tried to like steer into a like path of good for her, and when she died I was like, I don't have anybody else, so like it was like it doesn't matter what I do. So that was kind of, I went a little buck wild at that point. I isolated myself pretty bad, and if anybody asked me how I was doing, it was like, oh, I'm fine. And I just would go to work and try to show up for my fiance at the time and my kids, and I just didn't acknowledge any of the pain that I had stacked on top of the other pain that I was stuffing down previously, and things are just really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up having a mental breakdown in 2016 after partying and drinking for a while and not dealing with my pain, and this is when I ended up getting my diagnosis of bipolar. And that's when things started to make sense. And I really leaned into like getting therapy and all of that. During that breakdown, I ended up going to the mental hospital and I stayed there for a week. And when I got out, it was like I felt really good. And at the time, I didn't really connect that to, because I had been sober for 7 days. I hadn't had any access to anything that I usually run to cope with uncomfortable feelings. So I get out, and I'm doing really well for a few months. And I was like, well, I'm feeling great, so I don't need therapy anymore. I got this. I can just
Mm.
keep going. And I was still drinking at the time because it was like not connected that my drinking was part of the problem. I just assumed that if I addressed my mental health issues, I could drink normally, I guess. Um, and a couple months later, I ended up back in the mental hospital for attempting to end my life. I remember at that time things were just really, really dark, and I just felt like I was in this cycle of pain, and I couldn't figure out why. I was always hurting all the time. Like I would do really good for a while, and then it would kind of like crash and burn, and I just didn't know what was going on with that. This time when I went to the hospital, like I just had like a realization, like I can't live like this anymore.
Mm.
And I still hadn't connected it to the drinking, but like I knew that I needed to do something different because I realized like I didn't really want to die. I just wanted to not live the way that I was living. And I was like, maybe maybe I should listen to what these people are trying to tell me because I don't know everything. So I decided that I was going to do whatever they told me to and do whatever it took to like feel better in life. And this time when I got out, I feel like I did pretty well, but I was still drinking and still doing crazy things when I drank too much. Um, but I feel like I was moderating better at this point.
Yeah.
I had had, I think, a point a little bit before that where I had drank too much. It was like a angry drinking session, is what me and my friend had called it. And I don't remember getting either of us home, and that scared
And
me quite a
you were
bit.
driving.
Yeah, I was the driver, and luckily nobody got hurt. But like when I realized like I had no recollection of even getting us home, like that scared me because
Yeah.
anything could have happened. And so I was like, well, maybe I should drink less and just not drink as much. 2018, I ended up getting a opportunity to move out of Florida, which was my home state, and so I took it because I was like, things are just not working out for me here, so I'm going to move away. And I get to Virginia, which is where I am now, and things were okay for like a little bit. And I started working again, and I got right back into those old habits of like drinking and hanging out. And this is when I started to see more consequences of my actions a little bit more in front of my face. I had gotten into some situations with people at work. So, like, it was like everybody at work knew my business, and that was kind of rough for me. But at the time, I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to do what I need to do. I didn't come here to make friends, I came here to make money. So I continued to do that. And at some point, I felt like the same things were happening to me, but I was in a different environment. So I couldn't blame it on the things that I was before. Like, this wasn't the environment that I was hurt in. And the people who were holding me back previously weren't there. And I wasn't being abused by different people anymore. So I was like, what is going on? So I went back to therapy, and I did therapy for a couple of years. And then 2020 comes around, and it was just chaos, I feel like. I was still doing really well at work and I was showing up, but I was drinking a whole lot more and not really paying attention to much. I was just trying to disconnect from the uncomfortable feeling from COVID. This was around the time, I believe, like the George Floyd thing had happened, and it was like a whole lot of
Yeah.
things happening, and I just did not know how to cope with that. So,
You're
you know,
not unique
alcohol.
in that either. Like that period of time, I think particularly for people of color, when we were already medicating to deal with our like acute pains, but then ex, the, the external pains of the society that we live in became so glaring and so loud that we were also being oppressed by that pain as well. You're not the first person to mention that. I know that I certainly felt it myself. So that was certainly a very tough time, I feel like.
Yeah, it was rough too because I lost a lot of friends behind like racist comments and things like
Mm,
that. Um, and it was like it was time for me to start like speaking up for myself. So that was kind of rough for me too. And I was starting to tap into a lot of like deep things in therapy as well, as far as like my dad not being around. And when I was 16, I went to live with my grandma because my mom ended up working overseas, and that was the last time I lived with her. So it was like from 16 on, it was just like I got to kind of figure it out. And my grandma did the best that she could with an angry teenager who, didn't know how to process their feelings.
yeah.
So I know that
I,
that was hard
I
on
was gonna,
everybody.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm assuming that your grandmother just didn't have the skill set to deal or to just to nurture you the way that you needed to be nurtured, considering where you had come from.
Yeah, I later found out that my grandparents were alcoholics,
Mm,
and that kind of made some things make sense and kind of validated some things. And then I feel like she may have seen herself in me, and I think that's why she helped me so much. So I really do like I'm so grateful to her for that because, like I said, I feel like I could have gone into a lot deeper of a hole. But so I think it was like of May or June of 2020. I went out with some friends and I wasn't really in a good mental state. The guy that I was with at the time, we had been arguing, and so this was kind of like, I guess my angry drinking switch came on, and that's usually when I can drink a whole lot without feeling the effects like myself, even though like your body processes the alcohol and you're obviously drunk. But that just wasn't my mental view of it. But I had went out and I was drinking, and I don't even know how much I drank because I don't think I was really paying attention. But I do remember at some point, um, like I just feel like I was talking, I blinked my eyes, and then I came back, and then a friend of mine was just like, "Why would you say that? That was really mean." And I was like, "What happened?" I was like, "There's no way anything could have happened between like the time that I remember, because it was just like it felt like a blink of the eye, and that scared me." So I kind of tried to remove for myself from the situation, and um, my friends were drinking at the time too, so they didn't understand what was happening, and we just weren't understanding each other. And I ended up driving home, and I definitely should not have been driving. But I remember that night, like it was just, I went into like a really big spiral and felt really crazy, and I was really angry, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But after that night, I was just like, I need to reevaluate some things. Like maybe drinking might be the reason that I'm, going through these cycles. And it also made me like come to a realization that like what if, the nights I felt like I was really put together, I only felt like that because I didn't remember those periods in between
Mm-hmm.
of like, the blackout periods, because that, I mean,
Yep.
I drank like that quite a bit. So I was just like, man, what what was other people's experience of me drinking like? Because I really
Yeah.
didn't have any idea.
That's a scary
And
proposition, right? Like
yeah,
to recognize that there are just segments of what could have been your experience in life that aren't there, right? And perhaps that is, on the back of the decisions that you're making or you're not making. I mean, ultimately that's what got me to the same realization on my last straw. I was like, there was literally probably like 15 hours that my wife had to recount back to me, because, and even to this day, like I honestly still feel a degree of shame about it, because even to this day, like I just don't remember that chunk of time. Um, so I empathize with you when you say that, that it's a scary, a scary thing to think about. How are you showing up? And it seems like, in these moments, the propensity for us to do things that is uncharacteristic and potentially even life threatening for ourselves and those who are around us, is elevated. And that is also scary as hell.
yeah, because I think too, like really looking back now, I feel like there had been times where I felt really ashamed of what I had done before, and then I would drink to forget about that. Be like, well, there's nothing I can do to change it, so we're just gonna leave it where it is and keep moving. And I feel like that's kind of been a theme throughout most of my life. During my childhood, when I tried to speak up about my abuse with my grandma, it was just met with like it wasn't that bad, or I'm too emotional, and so a lot of things just had to get swept under the rug. So that was a norm for me. So it didn't seem abnormal at the time, but like at that moment when I was like looking back and I was thinking like, man, drinking might be an issue, but I wasn't quite ready to stop drinking yet. Um, it was maybe a few months later I started to get into like tarot cards and things like that, and like really getting into my spiritual journey. And I gravitated that way because I felt like I was coming to a standstill in my therapy.
Hmm.
I was starting to notice that like I was using drugs and alcohol to run, and I couldn't even remember what I was running from anymore. And I was like, if I want to heal from these things, I have to stop running. Um, by the time I had gotten to Virginia, and I think mostly because I had disconnected myself from access to everything. That's when I stopped doing the Xanax and all of the other stuff because I just didn't have access to it. And I just felt like I can drink and I'll just be okay because now I'm not doing drugs anymore. So I should be fine. And I didn't honestly at the time like view alcohol as an addictive drug, which almost doesn't make sense. But like I just thought that, if you take it too far, that's why people have to stop drinking. And if you just didn't take it too far, like you could just drink and be fine.
Right. Even though
Um,
everything that you're experiencing is basically speaking to the contrary, right?
you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I always hung around people who drunk either as much as me or more than me. So it was just like, okay, well, I'm not like this, so I should be fine. And after I started getting to the tarot cards, somebody I was watching just mentioned like if you're doing the same things to celebrate as you are commiserate, like maybe you need to rethink that. Like, and then the word addiction came up, and it just made me like, I was like, is this me? And
Mm.
so I tried to stop drinking for a while, but I just really couldn't do it. Like I would get maybe like a week or two and then something would happen and I'm back drinking again. And um, things kind of like really fell apart in, I guess it would be like April of 2021. The relationship I was in kind of crashed and burned, and um, I knew I needed to get out of that. And thankfully, like a friend of mine let me stay with her. But leaving that situation, I think was the start of my sobriety. I decided that I wasn't going to drink about it, and I was going to focus on taking care of myself because I just got to a point where I realized I hadn't been taking care of myself. I was exhausted. I was just going and going all of the time. And I'd been using really maladaptive coping mechanisms at that point. Like I would just
Hmm.
work all the time, or I would drink it away, or I would eat quite a bit. And I just felt like I needed to figure out what was going on with me. So in May of 2021, I left that situation, and me and my son we were essentially homeless at the time. And this was the start of my sobriety journey. I moved to Maryland in July. July 1st is actually my sobriety date. I had like a glass of wine with a friend the night before, and I just decided to not drink. When I got to Maryland, things were a little rocky. I was staying with my son's grandmother, which was his father's mom. And this was the first time we had really like spent this much time together in person. And it was really triggering for me because it was almost like living with my grandma all over again.
Mm.
And a lot of things came up. Like she would make comments about my body. So now I'm insecure about my body again. And it was like I could never do anything right. And I just think we just clashed is what it was, but it really bothered me. But I still didn't drink, and I don't really know what exactly it was that told me not to drink, but I was just like, I need to just be clear headed while I'm figuring this out. And I had gotten to about 30 days, and I realized like I haven't had a drink for an entire month. Like that's something I hadn't done. So something told me to say it out loud, and I kind of put it on my social media, and I got like a
Mm.
lot of like congratulations about it. And I just didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time, but I was like, let's see how far I can go with this. Like if I haven't drank in this long, then like maybe there's a possibility that I can learn to live without it. I can learn to cope without it.
Yeah.
Um, and then I was introduced to kickboxing, and it's kind of been on from there. The kickboxing was really good to get out a lot of the anger that I had, and dealing with the new triggers that I was dealing with staying with my son's grandmother was hard for me, but I just took it out on the bag. And I started
That's good.
teaching, which was brand new for me because I hated public speaking. I never thought that I would be speaking in front of people, but again, I was just listening to that little voice that was like, this is what you need to do. And even though I was really uncomfortable and it was really rough learning in the beginning, I'm really glad that I ended up doing it. And I moved back to Virginia after about 90 days of sobriety. And I think living in Maryland was great because I was, again, disconnected from everything. So I had a lot of time to sit with myself and feel my feelings, and get past like the urge to reach for something to deal with my feelings. And I did start to feel a bit more present, but I wasn't quite there yet. I moved back to Virginia, into a situation that I kind of knew wasn't going to work out for me, but I wanted it to. Because this was a person that I was hanging out with a lot when I was drinking, and I destroyed a lot of my life behind this person. Um, but I'm glad that I came back, and that lasted for a couple of months. And that was the first time, like, dealing with heartbreak feelings. That was the first time I wanted to drink, and like real bad. I was like, man, I wish I could drink right now. And so I removed myself from the situation and I sat with it because I knew if I stayed and I tried to act like I wasn't feeling how I was feeling, that was going to make me drink. And I needed to figure out like what was this trigger, because I hadn't felt anything that strong before. And I connected, like, really a lot of my drinking was emotional. Like, it was really like an emotional crutch for me. I really was using it to self-medicate, um, because like dealing with bipolar and you don't know you're bipolar, like, makes things worse when you're drinking because that then adds extra fuel to the fire.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackanddays.com. That's stacknday's.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. Sorry, let me ask you, and then we can keep going. I feel like the mental health issues, or just the reality of it, is something that has existed throughout your story, right? So now you're sitting here, you're 90 days sober, and you're looking at these, this reality of your bipolarism directly in the face. Like, how did you then start to tackle these, like, this deeply rooted sense of being unstable in your own mental health? Like, what tools did you turn to, other than beating the hell out of a kickboxing bag, to like get yourself to a place where you felt as though you had a little bit more of a handle on your reality?
I had done a lot of therapy, and I'm really grateful that I had done therapy. I believe that the therapy work that I did actually led up to me getting sober. I Once I had my mental health diagnosis, I really started to do more research, and I really started to try to build like a toolbox of coping skills, because I knew if I was going to not be drinking and that was my only coping skill, I had to put something else in the toolbox.
Yeah.
So I just asked my
What was in the
therapist,
toolbox?
journaling, and really it was mostly being honest with myself. I had to sit with myself and ask myself, why do I feel like this?
Yeah.
Where did this start? Because that situation that we were just speaking about, the one with my friend, that made me realize like I was choosing this, and I was sober at the time. So I'm like, okay, so why am I still in chaos? Like, I just didn't understand, like, why am I choosing this? And I knew it was deeper than me drinking at that point. So I really had to take a look at my past and start to see the things and start to see the parts of myself that I was running from. So it was a lot of like journaling and really just sitting with my feelings and talking about it and being honest to people around me when I wasn't feeling okay, because that was something I struggled with for a long time, was being honest about not feeling okay. I was always I'm good, I got this, and then I isolate until I feel better. And ultimately, I believe that's what led me to that deep, dark place where I didn't want to live anymore. And after that was when I was like, okay, I have to just stop caring about what people think about my sensitivity and my emotionalness, because otherwise, like, I can't live. And I didn't want to go that way.
Yeah. Have you found that the folks that you've surrounded yourself with today are more inclined to be sensitive to you being vocal about where you are? Because up until now, if I'm just like hearing you correctly, it doesn't sound like there was a real audience for your emotions and for your feelings. So has that acceptance been part of your success, or it's like kind of irrespective of where they were at or who they are, it's just more so a matter of you, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, like advocating for yourself, and that's where you found the strength relative to them being supportive of where you're coming from.
Actually, I think it was a little bit of both. When I had left the situation that I was in, I actually met up with a another friend who actually, like, she could see me past, me being like, I'm good, I'm all right. And she's like, are you really though?
Mm,
Because it's okay if you're not okay. And like I had to sit there and I was like, you know what? I'm not okay. Like, you're right. Like, absolutely right. Like, I'm not okay. And that really started me being more vocal about it, and her being so loving and caring and giving me like a place to stay and like a foundation to start with. That was where it started. I started to really open up and allow people in, which
mm,
is something that I realized I wasn't doing because I was trying to shut myself off to pain, and I didn't want to be hurt. So I wouldn't get close enough to people for them to even be able to be that kind of friend to me.
yeah.
And now I'm realizing I just have to be more open. And working at the kickboxing gym I was at the time too gave me the space to be open about how I was feeling. And then I started meeting more people who had gone through different things that I had been through. And this is when I started to realize, okay, this is why you share and this is why you're honest, because then you can find people who have been through something similar, and you don't have to feel like you're alone and you're the only one who's gone through this and like wonder if, like, am I crazy or is this real life kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you push back on that sense initially though? Because I feel where you're at, where you're just you make the intellectual recognition that in order for you to kind of really step into who you want to be, you're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to expose yourself to this pain. You're going to have to expose yourself to the discomfort. But then there's the kind of default self that is so used to putting up these protectionary walls, and it takes so much just to pull them down, even for just that one individual who's shown you that there is a path forward. Did you fight against that, or did you just get to a place and say, you know what, I'm just going to surrender and see where it takes me?
um Previously to that, I did kind of fight back on that, and that was when I had first started therapy and I first had my diagnosis, and I was like, okay, I'm good now, I don't need to talk about this anymore. And
Yeah, it's not a problem anymore.
right, like that's how I felt. So, and that at that particular time I was still like drinking and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, I'm good. I can just take what I got and roll from there. And I think that kind of ended me in some corners after that. But this particular time, I just I just surrendered because I was just ready to do something different. Like, I was so heartbroken and so like it just so many things had happened in that relationship. Like, I this was somebody I really like loved, and I thought they loved me too, but like in reality I think it was just we were connected in the fact that we drank a bit and we were both trying to disconnect from our lives at the time.
Mm,
And so when I shifted into a different space, obviously that relationship couldn't continue. And I've noticed that the universe will usually make things very like dramatic for me when it's something I have to let go of.
mm,
So I knew I had to let go of this person, but it was just so hard and I was crying all the time and I was upset. So by the time this friend was like, I don't think you're okay. Like, and I'm like, you know what? You're right. I'm not okay. Like, I'm tired. I'm done trying to
yeah.
hide how I feel. Like, I'm done, like crying in secret. Like, I've been through these things. Like, of course I feel this way and it's okay for me to feel this way. And I've found like in opening up and dealing with those things, like even if it makes other people uncomfortable, that is what has gotten me to healing, is being honest and being open and vulnerable.
Yeah. Um, the recognition that you have made for yourself that the universe finds a way to make things extremely dramatic for you when it's trying to tell you something. I'm hoping that's saved you some pain since you've made that recognition, because otherwise you're just kind of getting, you're getting tossed and around and beat up, having if you haven't made that recognition. So that's a pretty critical degree of like self-awareness, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't blame it on the alcohol or drugs anymore. So I had to really like look at myself and see like, okay, this was more than my addiction. Like my
Yeah.
addiction just fueled that. And I have at that point I was like, I'm done learning the hard way. Like I've been learning the hard way, and like I was the bounce back queen. So like it almost was like a challenge for me. I was like, oh, I did just drive my life into the ground, but look how fast I can rebuild it, you know? So
Right.
it didn't matter for some time. And then I was finally like, you know what? I don't want to learn the hard way anymore. Like teach me through love, through joy, through happiness, and through other experiences. And since then, I won't say that it's been like bunnies and rainbows, but like I've been able to learn in spaces where even if things hurt quite a bit, like I have people who love me and who can help me through it. And connecting with community has been super important. And I didn't have a lot of sober community until recently. I've just really started to get more into that because, like I said, it was mostly like I got to find a place for us to stay and make sure that I'm
Right.
working. And it's really,
The
I won't say
necessities.
easy to be sober when you're doing that, but it's like it's easier to focus on this big thing. And recently, now that I've been in this spot for a little while and comfortable, I'm starting to uncover other things, and that's where the sobriety podcasts and everything have come in. And I just really was able to look back and be like, this is why this was like this. And it's also nice to hear other people's stories in sobriety because I feel like I was starting to other myself because a lot of my friends are not in sobriety.
Mm.
Um, and I just didn't have anybody to ask questions to or be like, is it normal to feel like this? And so like now I'm really, really excited to like really dive deeper into that and to start opening myself up to doing more in the recovery space.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Talk to me about what your community looks like today. I know we touched on it a little bit before we started recording, and also I mean, you made a pretty clear declaration that you were going to be stepping into your recovery, from what I saw. And so, when you walk me a little bit behind, the motivation for that, and I feel like that's kind of what's brought into you to where you are right now. So those are some pretty monumental shifts as far as your healing process is concerned, right?
Yeah. So now I've been doing hula hoop dancing for almost 10 years now, and that has been a huge help in my recovery. I've always been a dancer since I was younger. Dancing has been like my number one outlet. I love moving my body. So like now I've met quite a few people in the hula hoop scene who have also gone into sobriety, and
Okay.
that's where my sobriety community really started. Was connecting with other hula hoopers that have also like found their way through sobriety. And
Love that.
so I teach hoop classes and I do hoop workshops now. And I started my podcast, Elevated Arts and Healing, the podcast, to give myself a space to speak more about my sobriety and really my recovery from all of the things, like from the trauma of my abuse and from I had an eating disorder before, and like just all of the things. I think really I want to make a space where people have feel comfortable in recovery, especially those of us who have struggled and are neurodivergent and
Mm.
maybe have like strayed down the path of addiction too because they were self-medicating, because that was how I um, justified it for so long, is this was my medicine and this is
Mhm.
what I needed to feel normal and to feel like I fit in. And So I want to show other people that it's possible to come out of that and that there are other coping mechanisms, and that a lot of the time it's like not just because we can't do it or we care about this substance more than, living a fruitful life. A lot of us just don't know that there's another path. A lot of us just haven't seen another way. I know I didn't for a long time until I really stepped into it. So
Hmm.
that's really what I want to give, is a light to other people who may be in the darkness.
Yeah. I love all the things that you're doing for yourself first and foremost. And, because it's really hard to like look in the mirror and have an honest conversation with yourself, a consistently honest conversation with yourself. I think that recovery sobriety provides that opportunity, but you got to lean into it to your point. And then, the next step of that is when you're turning it back out and creating spaces where other folks can, you know, can offer themselves that gift as well of proper reflection and you providing an example of, even though it's very challenging to get that space, if I could do it with all of the things that I've had to deal with in my life, you absolutely can do it too. I think that's fantastic. And and for that alone, like, I'm glad that we had an opportunity to just like, chop it up. And I'm so happy that you reached out in the first place, and that you're on the Stack of Days podcast to share your story. I wanted to ask you, and we talked a little bit about this as well before we got on, kind of like the last two questions that I like to ask my guests in closing out the episodes. I know you're familiar with them, so I'll ask you the easy one first. Um, what would you tell that person who's sitting there listening to this right now, in a dark space, maybe has just come to a place where they recognize that, alcohol is kind of the common denominator against a lot of the issues that they're trying to get in front of right now, but they don't necessarily know what the first step could look like. So someone who didn't subscribe to a formal program like yourself, what would you tell that person?
Um, First, I would say, like, if you feel like you're struggling, reach out. A lot of the times our brains lie to us and we feel like we don't have anybody. We're going to be a burden if we reach out. And a lot of the times it's just because we haven't reached out that people haven't offered that to us. But I would say if you feel safe enough and you have somebody safe enough close to you, I would say reach out. And if maybe you don't have um like a safe space, I know when I started this journey I really was in a space where it wasn't safe for me to speak up. I had to just kind of like fall in line.
Mm-hmm.
Social media was a really good place for me to start. I started looking for different groups, and you could even start like in a hobby group that you're in, because that was really for me where I found sobriety was hula hoop group. So find something that interests you, and maybe see if anybody else has gone through that. But definitely reach out, and if you can, I would say like start with therapy. When you're ready, you'll be able to cross that line, and you just got to give yourself some grace, because you might not be ready now, but keep taking those steps, because eventually you'll be ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And totally agree with everything you just said. Last question I have, and maybe this is, and again, there's no perfect answer, right? In the darkest days, and maybe actually this is not the last question, but maybe the second to last question.
Okay.
In your darkest days when you were really, really struggling, how would someone from the outside have known that you were struggling without you telling them explicitly?
Um, Honestly, I feel like I isolated quite a bit. Um, and if I start saying like I'm fine all the time, and like clearly I don't really look fine, I feel like that's a tell. And also if I just don't talk as much, because sometimes I'll still hang out to save face, but I'll be a lot more quiet and my energy it would be a little off. So I think that would be kind of a place to start. I feel like I've just gotten to a point where I try not to expect other people to know how I feel, because I was really angry for a long time in that dark space, because like couldn't anybody tell I was struggling, but like I was putting up a really good front, a really
Hmm.
good front. So I think really just like my energy being off, and I don't know, maybe if I like tried too hard to look like I was happy, because I feel like I did that too. So I would say maybe those would be some telltale signs for me.
Yeah. Just hearing your story and recognizing that you were very much in a place of both intentional isolation, as an individual, and then geographically you were moving around to kind of ensure that you were continuously kind of changing the scenery on yourself to make it a little bit more difficult to get to what you knew, I think, ultimately wasn't working for you. What did you need for yourself at that point in time to acknowledge that you were struggling and needed to change, do you think, in retrospect?
I needed to just be honest, and I was really scared to do that, because I felt like if I felt the weight of the pain that I was feeling after I lost my grandma, like she meant a lot to me, and like I spent a good portion of my life. I believe we lived together for almost like 10 years,
Mhm.
off and on, and she was, like I said, the only person in my family that I felt like, no matter what, she would make sure that I was okay. Like, even if she didn't agree with who I was, or, we argued a lot, she wouldn't let me be unsafe. And that, I felt like I had no safety net. And I needed to know that I had people, and I didn't reach out to my people, but I needed safety and stability, and I needed to start speaking up for myself, and I needed to start standing up for myself, because I was letting people walk all over me, and I hadn't realized it because I was masking so much of the pain with drugs and alcohol that I wasn't seeing that I was continuously creating that same situation over and over.
Makes total sense. Um, Amy, where can folks find you if they want to learn more about your experience and your journey, and also hooping, as you call it? I was on your website and I was like, man, what would it look like to take a hula hoop flow workshop? But tell us, where can folks find
It's definitely a lot of fun. AmyElevated.com, AMI elevated.com, and I'm also on Instagram at elevated_ANH for Elevated Arts and Healing. You can also find me on Facebook, Elevated Arts and Healing. And if you're into podcasts, I am on Spotify right now, with Elevated Arts and Healing, the podcast. And you can reach out. Like, Instagram is definitely like my main jam, but through my website, and I also see like Facebook messages and stuff as well. So that is where, if you're looking for more stuff, you can find me.
Cool, cool. Well, make sure that we throw all of that into the show notes so it's captured in one place for the audience to go to, so they don't have to feel like they have to continuously rewind the episode. Um, Amy, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability and sharing your story. I'm sure it's going to help somebody out there who's listening. So, really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I'm really appreciative that you have given me the space to open up. I had a tap that was like, "Hey, you need to reach out and do something." And here we are, and I'm grateful. Thank you so much, Ray.
You're welcome. I love the fact that you listen to that little voice. It seems like that's part of your toolkit, and that's it seems like it's not steering you wrong these days. So, good for you.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this week's show. We'll see you next time. Thanks. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days, or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices and healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.